Thank you all so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here and see some familiar faces and get to know new people. I also hear that someone is defending today, and so congrats to that person. And if you need to head out for that, I totally understand. I'm going to try to, in my overview slide, provide a bit more detail to some of the work so that for folks who need to head out early, you won't miss too much at all. So just to jump into it, my work sits at the intersection of human-centered design, future of work, and computer science. And all of the while, I take up what's called a community-based research approach. So for those of you who are less familiar, this means that in my work, I center participant expertise, their lived experiences, and alternative sites of knowledge production outside of the bounds of academic institutions. My community partners are much more than just participants. They're also collaborators. They also have directive control of the research process, data analyses, ownership of outcomes. And as part of this work, I study local histories of the communities that I partner with, especially as it relates to techno-based harm and erasure. And in the process, right, I'm often and prioritizing, thank you so much. I love a mug of water. This is perfect. That's great. It's like the moment you start talking, your mouth just becomes much drier. Maybe that's TMI, but here we are. So I'm cognizant of power dynamics between academics and the public, as well as given that I'm doing a lot of system building between software developers and users. And so such characteristics are essential to focus on community-based work, especially as we're working towards more equitable futures of work. And when implemented well, community-based research approaches can address the shortcomings of more traditional human-centered design by increasing the participation from those who have been historically marginalized. So to make my talk a little bit more concrete, I'd like to introduce you to three people who I've worked with over the years. And so this is Mariah. Mariah is an online freelancer on a popular platform called Upwork, upwork.com, where she offers a variety of writing services. So here's Mariah's online portfolio, where you can see details of her employment history and her online platform reputation. And so currently, Mariah is applying to online gigs, many a day, even sometimes, given the short-term nature of her work. And so if she doesn't get these gigs, she often doesn't know why, right? And so in my work, we explore, well, what if Mariah could get insight into why she isn't landing some of these writing gigs? In addition, here's Priya. So Priya is a micro entrepreneur who makes handmade goods. And Priya is currently selling her goods on Etsy, a popular online marketplace for artisan creators. And she sells, in addition to selling them on Etsy, she also does a lot of community building and finds her target audience on social media platforms like Instagram and TikTok in order to engage potential customers from around the world. And so currently, Priya creates in isolation, and in part to protect her reputation, because she's always worried about her original creative ideas being stolen, such as by larger conglomerates, the Forever 21s of the world. And so what if Priya, in my work, what we explore is how to create a network for whom she could bounce ideas off of, all the while knowing that her intellectual property was protected and not having to worry about her livelihood. And finally, I'd like to introduce you to Jarmel. And so Jarmel is currently the founder of a company of her business called Mel's Gifts and Party Planning. And she primarily is targeting her local economy with her custom gift baskets and services such as event and wedding planning. And so currently, Jarmel is using many digital tools. At one point, we estimated around 35 tools in order to run and manage her business successfully, right? And this isn't a tech business, right? This is a custom gift basket and event planning business. And she's using around 35 tools, such as Venmo, Wix, Canva, Facebook, Google Ads, you name it, she's probably using it. And so in my work, we look at, well, what if Jarmel had a way to keep pace with all of these technological advancements and feel empowered in the process of doing so? And so whether you're a micro entrepreneur, a gig worker, or an online freelancer, there are key challenges which unite this independent workforce, such as Mariah, Priya's, and Jarmel's that I've just described. So first, independent workers are intertwined by their use of and reliance on digital tools and platforms in order to find, plan, and complete their work. In addition, as independent workers operate outside of the directive control of organizations, there are often no paid opportunities for skill training, mentorship, or career support. And yet, they must operate as if they were businesses themselves. They must constantly be protecting their intellectual property, their reputation, both online and offline. And all the while, these workers must constantly be upskilling in order to keep pace with the technological innovation which they use for work. And because they are distributed in time and space, independent workers also must navigate these highly atomized, isolated work conditions. And while these independent workers are free from organizations' directive control, resulting in their, quote, independence, we know that from a decade of ethnographic work, there's also some chairs up here. Feel free to come on in. Don't worry, you're not interrupting. We know that from a decade of ethnographic and qualitative research that independent workers are, in fact, interdependent on each other and provide critical support for each other, peer support, social support, in the absence of more traditional forms of employment stability. And of course, one of these canonical works by Gray et al. Detailed the length that crowd workers in particular went to in order to facilitate social networks among themselves, citing a 5-year ethnographic study with 200 interviews and thousands of survey responses from independent workers. And it's important to know that this is no easy feat, given that there are no mechanisms for crowd or gig workers to communicate with each other on most of these platforms. And so finding each other is challenging, let alone building relationships. And so when we look at these different kinds of peer networks, we can see that they're both online and in person. They're among formal and both informal networks, and such as casual meetups or worker guilds, respectively. And they're also existing among both weak ties, acquaintances, and strong ties as well, family members, spouses, close friends, etc. And because of the promise of these peer support networks to address the many challenges that I've just referenced earlier, researchers and practitioners have built many sociotechnical systems, some of which I've included on this slide, which leverage large-scale peer support among independent workers. So in addition to some of the commercial systems up here, like Three Hands and Dribble, the field of HCI has produced dozens of research systems to structure peer support among these workers. So I'll highlight just a few great systems. One of them is Atelier, which provides a model of on-demand mentorship where workers could easily subcontract a task to other workers with lower skill levels and provide real-time support when those workers got stuck. Another great tool, Crowdfolio, orchestrated large peer networks in order to facilitate peer feedback on job materials. And Turcopticon, which is perhaps one of the most widely used research systems, which is currently now worker-owned and run, facilitates mutual aid and collective action among thousands of workers to overcome power differentials that often exist on these kinds of platforms. And so while these are different kinds of peer support with slightly different objectives, ultimately all systems facilitate these peer-to-peer interactions among large scales of independent workers, which are often momentary and often anonymous, in the hopes of achieving scale-friendly solutions that keep pace with this rapidly growing workforce. And while this is a really important need to address, in my work, I highlight 3 limitations of these solely socio-technical approaches. So first, in pursuit of large-scale universal solutions, these goals can be often incongruent with the relational aspects of peer support. So most of these systems, as I mentioned, provide these momentary interactions between workers. And therefore, there are limited opportunities to really get to know and build relationships with workers, develop social capital, if you will. And in pursuit of primarily online adoption, these systems overlook entirely offline peer networks, right? So if you've ever, I'm sure most of us have driven and taken an Uber, a Lyft, maybe we've driven for Uber or Lyft, right? There are often these like local networks of Uber drivers meeting outside of the airport in order to kind of rendezvous and share tips and tricks with each other for how to, do well on the platform. These are the kinds of offline networks that Uber has no representation of on their platform, right? And finally, Sociotechnical approaches are not accessible to those who have either less opportunity to build their skill set or those who may have more limited trust in technology more generally. And so in my work, I work with independent workers to build peer support systems to really emphasize this relational part of peer support in order for workers to get the job, refine their craft, and ultimately maintain their business. And so this is kind of how I'll structure my talk today. And so to start, to get the job, one of my systems that we've built, that I've built called Hirepeer, aimed at providing long-term career support through peer feedback on job materials. So how the system works, all of the freelancers who apply to a job give each other feedback on their job materials, leveraging their domain expertise to complete the job, as well as they decide among themselves who is most viable for the job. And so through pairwise comparisons that we generate a ranked list, which is then given to the employer to decide, here's who you should hire. And also along the way, everyone gets real-time feedback on their job materials as well. To help workers refine their craft, I actually worked with a feminist makerspace in Pittsburgh, where I was for both my PhD and postdoc, to build Peerdea, a mobile application to help micro entrepreneurs overcome isolation and provide entrepreneurs who make handmade goods in particular with early stage product feedback, fostering trust and accountability along the way. This is work that was funded by Instagram's small business team. And so some of the lessons learned from this work were adopted to support platform design decisions. And finally, to help workers maintain their business over a longer period of time, I worked with an entrepreneurial hub in Pittsburgh dedicated to racial equity to create Tech Help Desk, which is a service which addressed the need for this constant technical upskilling that I've described for both product and service-based businesses, such as cleaning businesses, transportation businesses, gift basket companies, as I've just described. And so building on Tech Help Desk, we're currently exploring the role of generative AI. I don't know for those of you on this side if you can see this corner, but I'm showing a little screenshot of our latest tool called BizChat, where we're exploring how to support entrepreneurs in some of the more tedious back office tasks, like creating a business plan, financial projections, and so on. And so in today's talk, based on advice from Sheena, who she told me this on our flight back from Costa Rica, which we shared, which was great. I got some one-on-one advice from Sheena. She was like, just focus on the future work that you're doing rather than focusing too much on the work that you've done. And I think that I've taken that to heart. And so I will only actually be talking about these two projects. If you're at all interested in Hirepeer, I'd be happy to talk to you after in the questions or one-on-one. And you can always shoot me an email to discuss as well. But in order to have lots of time to discuss my future work, let's just dive into how I've supported workers with the feminist makerspace to refine their craft, right? So after workers get the job, how do they go about improving the quality of which they can do the work, refine their craft, so to speak, especially when they're operating in isolation by default? And so in this project, I'm focusing on creative entrepreneurs like Priya, who I mentioned earlier. And we define creative entrepreneurship quite broadly. So people who turn their creative ideas into small businesses like poetry, screen printing, furniture making, as pictured here. And it's really hard to quantify the size of this sector. But we can turn to some indicators which show that the creator economy is rapidly growing. So in 2023, there were 7 million Etsy sellers. Etsy, as I mentioned, is this marketplace for handmade goods and vintage goods. And this is an over 200% increase since 2019, since the pandemic. And part of this rise is due to the ease of distribution, discoverability. You no longer have to have a brick and mortar in order to run a business. You can have an online shop front. But the other side of that coin, the very platforms that make creative work more accessible also put creators at greater risks for intellectual and property and infringement and reputational concerns. And so unfortunately, there are countless stories of small creators being ripped off by larger companies, reselling their work as their own without credit, and often selling it for a fraction of the price. So a few examples here on the screen. Pins, t-shirts, mushroom disco balls, which I actually have one from the original designer. which now you can, instead of getting them from Sophia's Designs, you can now get them on Amazon for about 1/10 of the price. For we also have a Converse infringement. I think this one, the Sickening t-shirt, and the Fabulous, I think, is a Forever 21 knockoff. And so you can find many, many, many examples of this unfortunate pattern. And it's actually really hard to know the extent of this problem. So now what I'm showing is all of these different pins from independent creators that you can see in the black text. That's the name of the creator, and then some larger conglomerate. I think this is actually Zara. It might have been the one who took all of these different pins and made them almost verbatim from what these individual creators have made. And it's probably much greater than what we have documented, but the really tricky thing is that folks don't have pathways for accountability, right? These small creators independently don't have accountability structures. So here's So in 2019, I partnered with a local feminist makerspace called Prototype in Pittsburgh. And Prototype's mission focuses on gender and racial equity in tech and entrepreneurship. And their ethos is that everything is a prototype, and iteration is critical for success. And so one of the things that Prototype does that was of particular interest to me was this, they host this annual incubator with 6 to 12 creative entrepreneurs each year. And they comprise monthly workshops, each month focusing on a different topic, such as branding, legal support, and goal setting. So here on the slide, I'm showing a photo from one of their legal workshops. So there's a lawyer who's giving them advice on, how do you form a legal entity, etc. And so together, we were thinking about these issues around online platforms and reputations, intellectual property, and we created a workshop that was embedded in the incubator and offered each year, and is still offered to date, to more explicitly center the ethos of Prototype, peer support, early stage design feedback, iteration, and of course, the role of online platforms. And so this is a photo on the bottom where you can see there's a bunch of people sitting around, and I'm starting to talk about in the back, the role of peer support, and we're starting to engage in this discussion. And this is actually a photo from February of 2020, just before the pandemic, just before the lockdowns, and that will become relevant in a second. But one of our motivating questions was, how might we center creative entrepreneurs' needs such that online feedback and information exchange were more readily available to them? And while this was something that Prototype was already curious about, given barriers to transportation, not everyone can make it to the makerspace all the time. So having some kind of online accompaniment is a really important way to continue to engage in relationship building, given that the root of relationship building is happening in the makerspace. But then, of course, with the COVID shutdowns, this need became greatly heightened. So following a community-based research protocol, we started what became a 4-year collaboration with a series of design workshops with 26 entrepreneurs. And this workshop series in particular focused on these challenges of community building technologies. And then from these workshops, we learned about how creative entrepreneurs attempted to seek out certain kinds of support. What are their practices right now? What are they already doing that's really helpful when it comes to asking for in-progress work from their peers and trusted folks? And so, for instance, Kim, who made homewares, shared, I have a group on WhatsApp with my friends. We've been friends for 10 to 15 years, and it's just like, steal my stuff. I just throw my stuff out at them, and I'm like, well, what do you guys think of this? And so here Kim's comments are really focusing on the security afforded by the small, tight-knit group of trusted peers. So much so that she isn't worried at all what this group does with respect to her creative ideas. And so through thematic analysis of this workshop series, core findings from the workshop were used to inform the design of a prototype system called Peerdea, which we then continued to iterate on throughout 4 annual incubators with 46 additional entrepreneurs, hosting workshops, conducting semi-structured interviews, and a diary study alongside. All the while, we're implementing the requests as quickly as we can, right? A small development team of me and maybe 2 undergraduates. And so ultimately what we have in the end, oh, a little animation there, is this system Peerdea, which I'll provide a brief overview of it, but I'm happy to ask any more questions. And then, of course, you can also see our CSCW paper on the platform. So Peerdea is an open source mobile application for Android and iOS, which enables peer support among these small groups of entrepreneurs, such as the ones who are going together through this incubator program at the Feminist Makerspace, in addition to relying importantly on the trust building that happens in person when possible. We also adopted some and implemented some features to support that continued relationship building online. So first, a user creates a post with the flexible authoring interface, which includes videos, links, polls to inspirational materials, all the while nudging users to share progress, to share work that's more in progress, less finalized, right? Going back to the ethos of prototype. And so this post is then displayed to a group feed. And importantly, there's always less than 25 people in each group. And this usually is just the incubator participants and their mentors. There's only one simple algorithm that we use to organize this feed. If a post hasn't gotten any feedback for 7 days, it goes to the top of the queue. Besides that, it's just reverse chronology. And this was a really important design consideration, given that more often than not, the algorithmic mediation of news feeds on most of these social platforms did not make it so that entrepreneurs could have these kind of continued conversations and focus on iteration of their work. And so that was a really important thing that they emphasized in the creation of Peerdea. And then to provide feedback, users can use this optional lightweight scaffolding, again, really thinking about defaults and what is optional and what is required. And then this form, it's kind of hard to see, but these are 2 sentence starters. I like, I wish, and all you have to do is complete the sentence, right, to make sure that there's equal parts negative and positive feedback. So, or critical feedback, hopefully not negative. So do see our CSCW paper for a full feature set and all of the details there. To quickly provide a few examples of how entrepreneurs used Peerdea, what were their posts? Here's an entrepreneur who focused on creative writing services, asking for feedback on their logo. Here's another entrepreneur who created a local boot camp for women developers in Pittsburgh. And this is them presenting their first sketches of the idea, right? So this is something you would never see on Instagram. You would never see a photo of a sketch of like stick figures, right? And this like rough kind of conceptualization mapping text stick figures. And this service is now a widely used. Hundreds of women and gender minorities in Pittsburgh are partaking in this bootcamp system, which is quite cool. And then finally, a graphic designer who shared a mock-up of a new bus stop advertisement, which I actually saw an iterative version of this in Pittsburgh at a bus stop while I was driving through, which was quite neat. So ensuring our community partner was involved in every step of data collection, data analysis, we engaged in thematic analyses to triangulate the Peerdea posts, semi-structured interviews, and diary entries. And so by doing that, we were able, to look at on-platform activity, and you can look at the paper for usage details there, but also off-platform activity, right? Like how are some of the ideas that are encapsulated in Peerdea transferring into other ways that they might be operating their business? So on-platform, we can see entrepreneurs were polling to conduct customer research, feedback on business branding, feedback on product ideas, service ideas, near market ready products as well. And then as well as sharing goals and requesting co-working in pursuit of accountability, and then sharing general status updates, and of course, encouraging words as well, which should not be overlooked because again, being an entrepreneur is a very lonely path. And so you do, always need encouragement along the way. And then, of course, off-platform, what was happening there? So we noticed that entrepreneurs, they'd either share some of their materials with us or they'd be talking about it in their diary. One of the things that we saw is business cards became this way of like adding, please give me feedback. Here's a QR code, and so you can start to see this like maybe exciting signs of some transfer from these lessons on Peerdea to other places. Also, email campaigns, adding to email signatures. I would love your feedback. Please respond, if you're comfortable doing so, as well as also interestingly social media. So using Signal as a way to create these small groups, small trusted groups as well. And then Instagram stories, other ways of like curating these smaller audiences within these much larger social media platforms in order to engage in constructive conversation. One entrepreneur, the same one with the tech equity nonprofit, described Peerdea interestingly as a poor man's copyright. And so they said, you make a recording of what you did, you mail it to yourself. This is back in the day, this idea of a poor man's copyright. You used to physically mail an idea that you came up with. And then you have that timestamp of the mail, of the USPS, that officially marked externally that was your idea at that time. If anybody tries to steal your idea, at least you can say, hey, I couldn't afford to do the trademark, but I did this much. And so this was, I think, a really interesting metaphor to connect Peerdea's use and how Peerdea might play a small part in this overarching ecosystem of intellectual property protection for some of these small creators. And when we asked makers to reflect on their experiences using Peerdea in semi-structured interviews and workshops, Lex, who ran a machine shop, shared how they thought Peerdea helped people to train in this language of constructive feedback, giving and asking. Another entrepreneur shared, I think Peerdea really pushed me to start thinking about things differently and create a solution where we had the problem and we didn't really know what we were doing. A creative writer shared how Peerdea was very kind. It wasn't a shredding process. And I think for those of us who have been in more of like a design crit environment, it can feel a little intimidating sometimes. So I thought that that was an interesting point to make. And people were like, wow, this is really intriguing. I want to know more. This is where I'm confused. And so it was reflections like these that pushed us to consider how Peerdea built on Prototype's ethos, or rather Prototype's community of practice, which centered design iteration, trust, and encouragement. And in this way, we situate Peerdea as extending Prototype's community of practice rather than supplanting it. So taken together, we argue that rather than attempting to replace Prototype's community of practice with sociotechnical intervention, which is a common pitfall of sociotechnical design, it was crucial to align Peerdea's design with the Prototype's in-person community of practice in order to strengthen relational peer support overall. Now moving on towards, right, so we help them get the job, refine the craft. How do you keep the business going, right? This question of maintenance, sustainability, this is top of mind for all of us, especially those of us doing a PhD. How do you keep going? And so if we remember Jarmel, who I mentioned earlier from Mel's Gifts and Party Planning, excuse me. So she's a micro entrepreneur. And by that, I mean, she is operating a business with less than 5 employees. And importantly, Jarmel's primarily targeting her local economy. And she's not alone. Over 1/3 of US-based adults have some kind of side hustle where they're attempting to have a secondary source of income, either, for fun or because they need the extra cash. And so while technical upskilling is a really important part of this, right? As you're running your own business, you're using all of these different tools to run your business. They're all being updated all the time. How do you stay on top of that? And of course, there's many different existing approaches to support this idea of technical upskilling, one of which being more of like the boot camp model, fixed length courses that eventually will terminate. And then other kinds of models pertain to uniting entrepreneurs with who are doing the same kind of business. They're like all tour bus companies. And so they have very specific kind of technology needs. But as we learned from our community partner, micro entrepreneurs often have very diverse domains: cleaning businesses, transportation, gift baskets, event plannings, and ultimately need technology support, which is diverse and ongoing. And that community partner is Community Forge, located in Wilkinsburg, which is about 4 miles from campus, very close by. And Community Forge is a former elementary school that's been repurposed into an office and co-working space that provides common unity, opportunity, and equality to the East End residents of Pittsburgh. And the primary goal of Community Forge is to empower and create self-sufficiency with the community, as more than 1/4 of the community lives at or below the poverty line. And in particular, Community Forge is primarily focused on building cross-generational Black wealth in the area. And so on this slide, I'm showing a few different photos, one being the exterior of the building, this old elementary school building, the doors of the community space, which have these colorful shapes on them, and then finally one of the interior rooms. This is All of the rooms inside are old elementary school classrooms. So they're actually quite cool. All of the white blackboards are like very low to the ground for the tiny humans that used to use the classroom. And it's a really interesting environment to be in. And this was built in 1919, excuse me. And so to begin our collaboration, we followed a participatory action approach where we engaged with community stakeholders to understand technology needs faced by micro entrepreneurs and all of the existing resources and workarounds that folks were doing already today. And so we attended formal meetings, participated in informal community gatherings hosted by Community Forge. Excuse me. And with these back and forth discussions, this served as a way to highlight community-driven needs, hypotheses, and have candid conversations about technology, which together served as the basis for the remainder of our co-design process. The goal of this approach was to provide immediate value to entrepreneurs and Community Forge stakeholders and to emphasize relationship building between community members as well as between researchers and community stakeholders. Is it not working again? Okay. Oh, thank you. And so we began what became an iterative co-design service, which we now refer to as Tech Help Desk. And so similarly to Peerdea, we engaged in design workshops, created an initial prototype. This time it was a tech service rather than a mobile application. Not everything needs an app. And then we continued to iterate on the design of Tech Help Desk. So in these, on the slide, I'm showing a few photos of the interior, some of the workshops that we ran, some of the meetings, and then the Tech Help Desk room during lockdowns when we had a sign saying, if you need Tech Help Desk, let's meet online. And then finally, the website that is now run and hosted on Community Forge, where entrepreneurs can go and make schedule meetings with tech providers even to this day. And so it's important to note that while 34 Community Forge members and entrepreneurs have been involved in this research process and the design of Tech Help Desk, the service is used roughly by about 40 entrepreneurs per year, and starting in 2019, continuing to date. Participation, importantly, in this research study was not required to receive tech support. So if you're interested more in learning about how we sustain the service over the past 4.5, almost 5 years, do check out our recent CSEW paper where we do a comparative case study with a similar program in Detroit run by Tawana Dillahunt and Julie Hui to really look at how do you sustain these kinds of tech upskilling office hour workshops, right? And what goes into that financially, right? What are, how do you make sure that people are getting paid if they're providing tech support, and how do you make sure that trust and relationships is transferred from one provider to the other? So all of that good stuff is in that CSEW paper. And so through our collaboration with Community Forge, Tech Help Desk included the following parameters. First, to emphasize relationship building, Tech Help Desk leveraged this side-by-side approach, kind of think about like pair programming, where entrepreneurs would bring their devices or be provided a device to loan if they didn't have one, and a local engineering PhD postdoc or faculty from CMU or from University of Pittsburgh would also bring their device. In addition, Tech Help Desk sessions were offered weekly at the same time. That was really important, Wednesday 1 to 4, and providers could meet outside of this time window as well, if entrepreneurs were busy or something came up in their schedule, as it often does. Both drop-ins and appointments were welcome, and note-taking was really important to encourage kind of follow-through and through line from one session to the next. Often entrepreneurs came for months and months on end each week in this space, so we needed to make sure there was a through line there. And finally, the entrepreneurs in our study came from a range of backgrounds. They had a bunch of different kinds of businesses. If one entrepreneur is using 35 tools, the next entrepreneur is maybe using a completely different set of tools. And so as tech providers, we're, always trying to stay up to date with everything that's going on. But really what was important is to disclose our bounds of expertise. Like at the end of the day, what ended up happening often is we would help, together we would be Googling, well, how do you, migrate, WordPress to, whatever new website builder that they want to use next, right? Like, so there was a lot of, tag teaming and really just teamwork with respect to solving these challenges. So we found that Tech Help Desk addressed a critical gap in tech support. And so between 2019 and 2021, where we were doing the majority of the data collection, we could see that there were 61 distinct computing challenges with very little overlap in them, kind of this classic power law distribution, which we refer to as the long tail of computing challenges. And so the x-axis depicts here the kinds of computing challenges. It's hard to see, don't worry. Business support, general tech strategy, cloud services, local storage. Sorry, not CEO, search engine optimization, even typing techniques, keyboard shortcuts, clearing off viruses, cleaning up, making sure hard drives run faster, really the full gambit. And this data was collected between 2019 and 2021, but really some of the core, the highest frequency challenges, business websites, discussing tech strategy and organizing local and cloud storage, these have really remained top issues that entrepreneurs come to Tech Help Desk to discuss. And so excitingly, we've been able to build on top of this foundational service and expand it into new areas. So one of those has been this 6-week course that we've designed based on the data that we've collected from Tech Help Desk, really this custom course fine-tuned to local entrepreneurs' needs in the area. As well as more recently, this generative AI workshop series, which, as it states, focus more on how might an entrepreneur integrate generative AI into their business workflows. And so to wrap up this section of my talk, I'll briefly discuss this workshop series where we were focused on, this is, of course, in summer of 2023, and things are changing so fast in this space, but we were curious for micro entrepreneurs who come from these very diverse technical backgrounds and business domains, how might they prefer to use, and importantly, not to use generative AI for their small business. And so this 4-part workshop series, so there's a table that's providing a quick overview, but each workshop focused on a slightly different task. So search engine optimization, social media, copy and email, and then images and branding, using different Gen AI tools that would fit those needs. So ChatGPT, Gemini, DALL-E, Midjourney. Importantly, in the co-design of these workshops, our community partners stressed how important it was to have alternative activities as well. So if folks wanted to engage with our kind of like tech stations that we had set up, that was great. But also if they wanted just to work on recording their business pitch, get a new headshot, play board games, that was a really important set of activities to offer alongside, just to emphasize, again, the optional engagement with the technology. So to provide a rapid overview of this workshop series, each entrepreneur was partnered up with a Tech Help Desk provider. So providers are in orange, entrepreneurs are in purple. At this table, you can see everyone's kind of circling around this conference table. And in particular, this is a photo from our workshop on using image generation like DALL-E and Midjourney to boost business brand. And we found that communal exposure and interactive exercises were critical to introducing micro entrepreneurs to Gen AI for a few reasons. So embedding these workshops in a network of trust helped to overcome some of the anxieties entrepreneurs experience given fears about being left behind. And workshops showcased empowering examples from experts within community and peers from within the community. So for instance, one expert demo that we showed in this workshop was, let's see here, for how an entrepreneur used a constellation of DALL-E, Photoshop, Procreate, and ChatGPT in order to create these really fantastic shorts at the bottom, you can see the Pittsburgh skyline. And importantly, when we asked, so just to be clear, he's using ChatGPT to generate complementary hex codes, DALL-E to create the images of the Pittsburgh skyline, and then Procreate and Photoshop to edit these images and then ultimately create the clothing mock-up, which he then sent off to his supplier. And he's been selling these. These are selling very well. He has a whole Gen AI product line, clothing line. And specifically, when we asked what was the key takeaway for use, when he said, what is the main thing that entrepreneurs should know when they're using these technologies for their business? And he said, get the photos out of DALL-E and into Photoshop, Illustrator, or Procreate, right? So in order to use generative AI, you have to use a lot of other tools as well in order to derive actual value, in order to have a product that you can actually put on market, right? Nothing is ready right off of these tools, right? Nothing from DALL-E can be used. He felt comfortable using to sell right away. And so contrary to these kind of like simple and natural interface designs, right, these tools are marketed as anyone can use them. We're seeing these large disparities in use of generative AI. And I think from this workshop series, we can take away a couple of implications from this work. And the first is that benefiting from generative AI requires a host of supporting technologies and a laundry list of skills beyond solely prompt engineering. Sure, prompt engineering is an important part, but so is, browser literacy, typing, keyboard shortcuts, understanding local and cloud storage, text editing, image editing, etc. In addition, communal exposure facilitates entrepreneurial agency to choose how and how not to use generative AI by sharing, sharing with peers, this is how I prefer to use it. I'm actually uncomfortable using it because of some of the, ethical implications of image generation technology. And finally, similarly with the work with Tech Help Desk, where we saw that long tail of tech challenges, we are similarly seeing this long tail of skills and tools for successful application of Gen AI. It's not just one tool, it's a host of tools, like image editing, Procreate, Photoshop, and really it's never as simple as it looks, so to speak. And so to wrap up this work, even entrepreneurs who are accessing primarily their local market need to be able to constantly upskill their technical knowledge to maintain their business. And Tech Help Desk played a role in this by emphasizing relationship building again, between, of course, entrepreneurs and community stakeholders, community forge staff, but also between the academic personnel and our community partners. And finally, in order to sustain and grow this service, we needed to keep pace with community needs and evolving needs, right? When Gen AI came out, everyone was like, what should we do here? And the reason why we were able to hold and host this generative AI workshop series is because we had spent 4 years of building rapport with community partners, right? So they knew who we were, they knew who our intentions were, and this is really what provided the important backdrop to host this workshop series. And ultimately, it's more than just a system that's required, right? So in conclusion, coming back to this idea of community-based approaches to building peer support systems, especially given that independent workers are interdependent on each other, peer support is essential in these new forms of work. And rather than these universal large-scale solutions, we should also be thinking about smaller scale and transferable solutions that provide relational support. Rather than solutions that are sociotechnical systems that are solely online, we should also be prioritizing peer networks which are place-based, offline, and resourcefully assembled. And finally, rather than building tools which heighten disparities, we should also be thinking about decentering technological intervention, providing wraparound support such as educational materials and workshops for maintenance and repair. Directions of future work. How am I doing on time? So it's 1:20? Okay. Ooh, but I do want to have some time for questions. So really fast, I'm interested in, of course, continuing to explore Gen AI at work, but rather than thinking about it solely as responsible use of AI, can we also think about resilient use of AI? Frontier models will come and go. How do we recenter entrepreneurs and workers' focuses on their business tasks and have them comfortable with whatever technology is underneath the hood, as long as ideally what they're working towards is their business tasks, right? Most of the entrepreneurs I'm working with care much less about peering into black boxes as they do understanding how to take this technology and transfer it to apply to their bottom line. And so how can we think about, in addition, in that kind of reframing new notions of AI literacy, right? Current notions are, majority of them are based on like computer science pedagogy, and what if instead we thought about AI literacy in context, in the context of work, in the context of entrepreneurship. To do this work will require advancing community-based research in computing, such as supporting community-based technological innovation and inquiring upon many of the institutional barriers that exist to community-based research. And the one thing that I wanted to end on really quick, kind of based on Sheena's advice, is to show you one of the tools that we're building. This has not been deployed. This has not been published. This is very fresh. And this is work done with my student, Quinton Romero-Loro, who is a stellar undergraduate at University of Pittsburgh in computer science. And also Akash Gautam has recently joined the project as well. And so this is a tool that we're calling BizChat, and it's building on this Gen AI workshop series that we hosted with Community Forge, as well as some of the work at Prototype that we've been ongoing since our Peerdea days. And so this is a GPT 4.0 powered web app to support entrepreneurs who have various various backgrounds in technology to complete a range of back office tasks. In particular, we're focusing on business plans, right? So to begin, an entrepreneur, if they have their website, they would share their website with them or answer a set of questions about what their business does. Hopefully this demo is running okay on your end. Yeah, okay. And then after answering some questions, what's happening now in the background is we're scraping the entrepreneur's website to understand what their business is about. And it takes a little bit of time. Hopefully we'll iron out those kinks, but soon you'll see this business plan be updated. The entrepreneur can also see what this system knows about them. They can export their business plan. Okay, it's just been updated. And a business plan is kind of a multi-page document about all these different aspects of a business: executive summary, competitive analyses, financial planning. And ultimately, what an entrepreneur can do is use these prompt suggestions to then couple the use of both the chat interface and this rich text editor. And importantly, they're able to do direct manipulation, right? It's not just like copy pasting to a different browser and then editing and refining the text there. Importantly, we also offer these inline suggestions based on the back and forth conversations with the chat that an entrepreneur can automatically apply to the rich text editor and continue editing and refining there. These prompt suggestions are both divergent and convergent. So on the task at hand, as well as taking a step back, let's focus on a different part of the business plan that you haven't yet edited, you haven't yet refined. And so you can see that in use of this system, and this is of course just a demo of Quentin using it, but you can see this kind of back and forth between conversation as well as direct editing. And then ultimately you will output your business plan here. And then in addition to your draft business plan, you'll also have a set of questions that you can then take to an expert coach or a peer coach to have a conversation and to refine on this draft, right? This is not meant to be a final draft of a business plan that you send off to get a loan or to get a grant. This is a first step in the right direction, because most of the entrepreneurs that we work with don't have a business plan, and yet having a business plan is a key correlate with a successful business. And so this is one of these maybe less exciting tasks that Gen AI might be able to actually provide sustained value for. So thank you so much for your time and attention, and I look forward to your questions.